Welcome back to Relative Time. Now, this is the second part of a two-parter where I'm looking at a couple of Star King watches. And if you missed the first part where I look at the Highbeat AMO276, I'll put a link down below. Otherwise, let's take a look at their Quartz BM1007. Where the AMO276 had a nice elegant feel, the BM1007 is far more casual. The overall design is simple, minimalist, and modern. And here, I can see a little bit of a Nomos inspiration, but not as well done. When you pick it up, the first thing you notice is how light it is, followed by how thin it is. Weight-wise, it barely weighs anything at 65 grams, and that's with the bracelet. But that's not too surprising, seeing it's only 8mm thick. Width-wise, it's listed at 41, but I found it barely over 40. And the crown at the 3 is this tiny little nub that's really hard to do anything with. But it only adds a couple of millimeters, so it's 42mm wide with the crown. Now, lug to lug is almost 45, and it uses 20mm straps. And it has a minimal water resistance of 30 meters. So overall, it's a small, nice little platform. Just one you might have to be careful with. The finishing on the case feels very smooth, and I'd say it's some type of chrome coating, as it reminds me of a Timex Weekender. What the case is actually made out of, though, is a big question. The listing shows it's both stainless and alloy steel, and if I had to take a guess, I'd say it's alloy. Although the Caseback itself says it's stainless, and it does have a similar texture to the case. The Caseback, by the way, is a snap-on, which at this price is expected. But one very nice surprise here is drilled lugs. Now, the crystal here is also in question. It's listed on Amazon as being mineral, and for the price, that's what I'd guess. But if you look it up on AliExpress, it lists it as sapphire, and it did pass a water drop test. So it's possible it's sapphire, but I can't say for certain. The dial is a flat basic white with black indicators painted on and blue hands. And the main dial is overall rather simple. But the sub-second hand is a little more complex, as well as being a little larger than the typical sub-second hand. Right off the main dial, there is a very small drop in height to what basically becomes a small ledge, which is where the minute indicators are. This is followed by another drop to a very nice and fine textured subdial, which has a very fine circular pattern around the hand, which actually is a very cool effect. But the problem is that it's a really fine pattern. It's very hard to see it unless you actually have just the right light and angle. Otherwise, the entire surface just looks flat and a little boring. The only other major design element here is the date, which is at the 3, and it has a very interesting design choice around it, which is a nice way of putting it. Basically, it's a bullseye and the word date, although incorporating the water resistance into that design is rather creative. Now, first off, you really don't need to have the word date. Most people would be able to figure it out. And secondly, the bullseye or sight reticle here is just an odd design choice. One that will not appeal to most people, myself included. Although, if I'm being perfectly honest, there is a small part of me that thinks it's slightly cool. But that's only because I just finished watching season 3 of Daredevil on Netflix. Otherwise, it's just odd. Although one thing I did notice is that while the reticle looks a little odd on its own, if you stop focusing on just it and back away and look at the overall design, it does blend in and doesn't look too bad. The other thing here is the hands, which are simple batons that are supposed to be a very cool metallic blue finishing. And they are, but it doesn't work quite right. You have to be at just the right lighting and angle for that nice blue coloring to come through. Otherwise, if you're looking straight at them, they just look more of a charcoal black, which still looks good, just doesn't look like it's supposed to. Now, movement-wise, it's a simple quartz watch, but I have to say that it is a rather sloppy movement when setting it. In fact, I've never had a watch where, with the crown pulled out, The hand would move on its own just by tilting the watch. And it is rather loud. It's not Timex loud, but if you are sensitive to ticking, you won't want it on your nightstand when you sleep. But moving to the bracelet, we have a nice positive here. Now in part 1, I mentioned that I'm not a fan of the normal Milanese mesh bracelet, and I'm still not here. But I will say that this is one of the better mesh bracelets I've run into, especially for a lower end watch. And I like the double securing mechanism on the clasp. Wearing it is what you'd expect. The chain bracelet helps it to conform nicely to your wrist. And overall, it's a small, thin platform that you really just forget it's there. Which now that winter is here and the temperature is dropping, I can appreciate a thinner watch while I wear a bigger jacket. Right now the watch is about $25, which I'd say is okay, considering it has a nice case and bracelet, but not a good movement. Although when you consider the other options out there at this price, maybe just a little higher, well, if we knew that this had sapphire, that might change things. Otherwise, you'd really have to be in love with the design in order to pick this one. Overall, this watch really is a mixed bag, which honestly at this price is pretty much expected. It's not a watch I'd buy myself, but it might be one I'd consider to give as a gift for someone's first watch. Although I think there are some better options out there. Its sloppy movement is by far its biggest weakness, and when you consider that that's the whole point of a watch, is pretty important. But on the other hand, it is still a quartz watch, so you shouldn't really have to adjust it very often. And at the same time, it does have a very nice thin case, nice bracelet, and even drilled lugs. So for me, the takeaway from this experience is that I think it's a platform with potential. It just has some bugs that could be worked out. And I think it's an indicator that some of Star King's other thin quartz watches could warrant further exploration. But in the meantime, let me know what you think about it, and especially if it's a watch you'd consider giving as a gift. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for joining me.